So here we go. So now we have our style sheet open. If you're in Dreamweaver, you basically would say File New, and you would go to CSS. I already had that open, so I'm going back. It's going to be style.css. That's what I named it. You want to go ahead on and save it with File, Save As, and you don't necessarily have to declare what type of document this is, like you would in HTML, because HTML has to know what you're doing. So you have to say open and close and let it know that this is a style sheet. But since you're already declaring it by the name of it, style.css, the computer will know how to interpret the file. Okay, so we can just get moving and start typing into our file. The first component that you normally deal with a style sheet is the body. I think we might have explained this in the previous class. And inside of your body, what you want to do is you want to deal with how the font looks. You want to deal with your background colors. You want to deal with the font size, and you also want to deal with the font family. So let's start with the font family. And normally you have Times New Roman. Some people like to use Arial. And then we want to deal with our background. Now, if you're dealing with divs, and remember we talked about divs in the previous lesson, you know, div represents division, and it's just the little containers that are on your site. So normally inside of those divs, you would put your background image. And if you want it to be a background image on the entire page that spans across the page, you could define it right here inside of your body. And most of the time, let's just say, just for craps and giggles, background attachment. Oh, I'm sorry. Background. We just wanted to be background. And then you click on the URL. Out of images, you could choose any one of the images here. So let's just say I'm using logo 4. Logo 4 is huge. It's 2700 by 2700 pixels. And when you put that in there, what'll happen is on your main page in your body of your HTML document, that will be the main image. But I'm just showing you this just for teaching's sake. We're not going to go and look at that right now, but that's what you can do to set your background. We don't want to set any kind of background, but you can. The font color, that's the other thing that you can set. The color can be black, it could be blue, it could be whatever you define it as. And we talked about this in the previous class as well. Font size, let's deal with that. I like 16 to 18 for font size. And that's pretty much the things that you will put inside of your, oh yeah, remember margins. Now, what ends up happening is a lot of times when you have a website, sometimes you have this extra space around the website. And if you want your website to be tight, which I think I've even expressed this in the previous lesson, but if you want your website to be tight where there's no space where the site comes down some, you set your margins to 0. So it's 0, and then you can say auto. And when you do this particular action, what happens is you're saying that the margins all the way around the site should be tight. There should be no white space. So you set your margins. And also one thing you have to remember as well in browsers, now this really did work in older browsers, but what also has occurred now with the newer browsers is that you have to define the size of the space so that the auto margin can work. So sometimes what you will see when people want to space a div or have it centered on side of a page, they'll say margin left auto, margin right auto, and it's supposed to just basically make everything centered. But what happens in the newer browsers, it doesn't necessarily know how to do it if you don't define the width of the page. So if you find that margin 0 auto is not working for you and you still have white space, or in some scenarios that your div isn't being centered, then what you will end up doing is you'll define your width. And the width of what your body would be or your main container would be or whatever the case may be. This is not necessary for the body, but I'm just giving you information ahead of time when it comes down to divs, since I was mentioning divs. Okay, so you have your font family, you have your font size, you have your margin, and you have your color, okay? So that's one of the components of CSS, the main component. Then the next thing you want to be able to do is classes. And you create classes and apply these classes to your divs. Okay, so a class will be like this. You'll put a dot, a period, and you'll name it. Let's just say new class. You can name it whatever you want to name it. It doesn't matter. They also have an open and close bracket. Okay, and inside of that class, you define how you want that div to function. So as we were talking about earlier, we want the margins to be centered. So we do the margin 0 and auto. And then thereafter, let's just say you have some other kind of functionality you want to do, to have a background color. And the background color could be blue. Another functionality that you might want to do, you might want to set the width. And the width just basically says how wide the container would be. Most of the times, most monitors, you kind of go about 1,000 nowadays, because people's monitors are very, very huge. So 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. When you're dealing with responsive design and adaptable design, you want to go more into EMs. And you can actually go on Google and look up a website that says, convert pixels to EM, and then it will give you the correct number to put in. But for now, let's just say 1,000 pixels by height, auto. And the reason why you set your height to auto is because inside of this container, you want things to be you want it to be easily expandable based on what you put inside the container. So you have your margins tight. And based on what goes in it, it will begin to just basically grow with the content that you put inside of your div. Okay.